Hello, everyone. Welcome to Enterprise Decoded, a technology podcast about the systems we build and the people those systems are built for. Hi, I'm Anjimaram, and each month we will explore AI, data, platforms, automations, enterprise systems, not through the hype or buzzwords, but through an intentional, empathetic, and humble leadership. And here is the format. In every episode, we will cover the good, the bad, and the ugly. What's working, what's broken, and what we need to face head on. So today, let's start with the good of intent. Because in the AI first world, technology decisions don't just shape products, they shape people, organizations, and entire markets. We're starting with something very fundamental: intent. To explore this with us today, I'm joined by someone whose work has helped shape how executives and boards think about digital transformation. It is none other than Dr. Vijay Gurbaxani. He is the founding director of the Center for Digital Transformation and the Taco Bell Professor Emeritus of Technology Management at the Paul Mirage School of Business at UC Irvine, University of California, Irvine. He is also Distinguished Fellow of the Information Systems Society.
Anji, thank you so much for that extraordinarily generous and kind introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I love the idea of the Enterprise Decoded podcast. I think it will serve a very valuable need for the community. And I like the focus on the good, bad, and the ugly, because when you have a technology that is as transformative as AI is, there's a good side, there's a difficult or bad side, and then there could be some fairly unfortunate downsides, which we're calling the ugly. So I think it's really important that we have more thoughtful conversations about how we build this particular technology and why.
Many enterprises are rushing towards AI without clarity. Mm-hmm. So in my opening question, I would like to ask you, why does intent matter so much now, more than it did in earlier tech waves?
We have to ask ourselves very broadly is what is the direction we want to move our companies in? And sort of the second question to that is, how can we succeed in a world that will look quite different from today? But then that's sort of the macro level sort of transformation that's going on. You know, the economy after electricity looked very different from the economy before electricity. But then when you get to the technology itself, intent becomes even more critical because, you know, you're encoding priorities into the technology, you're embedding assumptions into the technology, and you're sort of influencing outcomes at scale. But what underlies or underpins all of that is this is the first technology that we've had that can actually make decisions for us. And this is what changes the entire game.
Thank you, Professor Vijay. That's a key distinction. I think many leaders say it as a strategy, but often it becomes a tool-first approach that they start with. Professor Vijay, when you work with executives, what does AI first truly mean if it is done in the right way?
You know, we see the phrase AI first everywhere these days. Everybody says they want to be AI first. But I think it's very useful to unpack what it should be and what it shouldn't be. So the first thing I would say, and I've heard this from so many senior executives, it is another technology in my toolkit. That's a tool-first approach. And initially, I would be a little more cautious in the way I would respond. But now I've sort of become a little more direct where I say, you know, you can certainly look at it as being a tool, but it's a much more powerful sort of technology than simply another tool, precisely because it is a general purpose technology. So I think we have to be clear about the scope of what AI is. And it certainly doesn't mean use AI everywhere, but it's sort of rethinking sort of the sources of competitive advantage. You know, how value creation will occur in an AI intensive world. What happens to decision making? AI is a very, very powerful resource that all companies have available to them now. So we have to start thinking about it in that way. So it's not use AI everywhere. It's sort of think in terms of the broader strategic context. You know, Demis Hassabis won the Nobel Prize for chemistry because of what DeepMind could do around AlphaFold. And it doesn't have to be as complex as Nobel Prize winning chemistry. It could also be understanding your customers better. It could be understanding your supply chain better, because that's what AI fundamentally does. You know, it's a pattern recognizer technology, right? And this needs to be the explicit understanding that it's not about making our existing businesses better. And you already said this, Sanjay. It's about these new business models, because we should be thinking about what can we discover. I mean, there's an excitement there that gets lost if you only focus on the automation piece of it. We could be delivering so much more value to our customers, no matter what industry you're in. We absolutely need to embrace AI for efficiency, but we also need to be thinking, I think, with optimism about how do we discover sort of new ways of doing business, so new products and services, new business models, new processes, new skills in our employees. I think all of this over the next 10, 20 years is going to change dramatically in ways that we don't fully understand today.
So it's really not about where AI can fit. It's more about how AI change the way the value is created.
And you have to ask yourself these questions. What are the high impact decisions in your business? Where is the value being created? Then you have to ask a second question, which is, will these be high impact decisions in the future? If AI can automate them very easily, maybe that won't distinguish you from your rivals. And then, of course, there's the essential question of, do you have data to support this? Can you go out and collect new data? And then people tend to forget that at the end of the day, AI is software. It is a very, very powerful new generation of software that is very different because software in the past was deterministic. This is probabilistic. But you also have to ask the question is, where can you apply these at scale? So you need repeatability, you need frequency. So if you were, for example, a bank or making credit decisions all the time, if you can find better ways to predict who's going to be a worthy sort of customer of your bank, who's going to be less worthy as a customer, and you can do those better than you've ever done in the past and faster than you've ever done in the past, now you perhaps have a new source of competitive advantage. So I think focusing on the processes that make you different are crucial, and applying AI to strengthen those is I think, critical to success.
Thanks for elaborating more, Professor, on that. This brings us to decision-making frameworks now, which is one of the big goals of this podcast. Professor Vijay, your work in digital transformation often emphasizes a lot about structured thinking, and that leaders need frameworks to guide transformation over time. So let's say if I'm CIO or CTO or CFO listening to this podcast, and if my CEO says we need AI now, that's what is happening in every organization. And what framework should I use to respond intelligently, to respond in execution? Yeah.
So I think a useful metaphor to think about is we're running a marathon. AI is not going to stop improving anytime soon. We're going to see massive improvements in the capability and the power of AI. So this is a very long race. At the same time, it comes with an incredible amount of uncertainty. We don't know what the future is going to look like. So one of the things I advise companies to think about is, how do you run 400-meter races continuously till you get to the end of the marathon? So I think first it's important to recognize that nobody has all the answers, and we need to think one stage at a time. And you really think about, well, what do I need to do this year, or perhaps even the next 6 months, the next 3 months? So start with that. But you have to have an end goal in mind as to an aspirational goal. What is the direction I'm going to go in? You have to make some bets about what will the future hold? What does my company need to be good at? Once you've got that in place, then I think the subordinate question becomes, okay, so now that we have a general direction, what am I going after with AI? Is it growth? Is it productivity? Is it experience? Is it risk reduction? Is it new product? Now you're going to have to do all of these, but you can't do all of these at the same time. I mean, you may be able to do a few of these at the same time. So I think that's the first question. Have that sort of strategy mapped out. And then, this is not a cheap proposition. This is a very expensive proposition, even though the returns can be very high. So and then you've got sort of talent issues, which is how much change can you subject your employees to. So you have to be very clear about what it is you're doing in each phase of your AI rollout. And then you get into sort of even more critical questions. Well, what is the decision surface? What are the key decisions that the business depends on? One of the things I like to say is that every company that succeeds knows how to do something better than its rivals. You have to be really, really good at something, best in class, if you are able to outperform your competitors. And I think you start with that and say, if that's the case, and you assume, let's say for a moment, that holds, then you have to really say, how do I use AI to make those decisions better? And then because of sort of the risks of AI, we have to absolutely focus on the issue of trust. I met with the CEO of a small company yesterday, novelty goods, supplies all the big box retailers. And it was sort of interesting because one of the reasons he asked to meet with me was because he was seeing a modest amount of resistance among his employee base. And then you have to start answering, well, what are they worried about, right? And I think, can they trust the AI becomes a hugely important question. Is it reliable? Is it explainable? What is the transparency around the people? I think even well-meaning people who want to serve your company well have reasonable questions about AI, because we've all seen examples of what happens when AI goes wrong. And when AI goes wrong at scale, that can be pretty bad. So I think you have to build trust. And finally, the readiness. Readiness is both technical and human. So do you have the data? Do you have the culture? Culture is huge. And the talent, and sort of what is the operating rhythm of your company? All of these have to be addressed because there's so many companies, that focus on sort of implementing AI, but they haven't thought through all of these. I would call them necessary capabilities to ensure that your AI initiatives are successful. So I think you can't skip your questions. This is one of the reasons why pilots don't run. They have pilots that may be modestly successful as a pilot, but they don't scale because they haven't thought through the difference between running a pilot and running something in an operational way.
Thanks, Professor. That's such a crisp framework. If I have to just quickly summarize, you talked about four things in the framework. One is the intent. Another one is decision surface. The third one is trust requirement. And the fourth one is the most important one is organizational readiness. I like this framework, the way you put it. Now let's go deeper into the theme of this episode. You said earlier AI embeds assumptions and priorities. So the process of building matters, not just the model or the output. Can you talk about how you build matters as much as what you build?
I think for a lot of reasons, actually. The first thing is, we've all heard about pilots that don't scale. I mean, everybody talks about this. And I sort of understand it because when, AI first burst onto the scene, everybody was excited. It reminded me of sort of like, we all learn how to drive a car. And if you're lucky enough, your parents actually give you a car to drive. I remember when I got my driver's license, like no matter who wanted to ride, I was happy to give it to them. So I went everywhere that the car would, I needed excuses to drive. And I think this is sort of a silly personal example, but it's the same thing about with AI. People got so excited and all these companies went into like, I want to use generative AI, and they started building all of these pilots without sort of a clear sense of strategic intent. And I think that's, at some level that's understandable. It was too attractive to resist for at least some people. We didn't ask the hard questions about sort of, will this work at scale? Will something work on my desktop is quite different from will something work at scale. I'll mention one company whose name I will not mention, but I know one company, and the CIO was talking to me and he said, when he had left the company, and he said he was talking to some people there. They had built like a few hundred GPTs, meaning there could be an Anji bot, there could be a Vijay bot, there could be a CRM bot, there could be all of these different things. And then, of course, many of these people lost interest, and you go around and these things are floating around the organization, but they're not being used, and they're expensive sometimes because of what they consume. So I think, number one, the how is important because you have to think in advance of architecture, data reliability, governance, discipline. I'll give you a great example. This is not AI, but years and years ago, some people that I know were working in a large consumer retail company, basically, and they built a system that analyzed the transactions that were going through their point of sales network, and got far more consumer insights than they had ever been able to build. But they literally built it on a shoestring budget. They asked for a small amount of money. The CFO gave it to them, and it was incredibly successful. And then one day I get this, I forgot all about the story. A few years later, I get a phone call saying, how much do you think an industrial strength version of this system should cost? And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. But anyway, because it turned out the IT organization came in and said, it's going to cost us $10 million now to build this. The system's become so invaluable to us that we have to build it at scale. So all the things that you need to run an organization reliably and securely costs a lot more money than a vibe coded system, which is, we never used the word back then, but that's what it was. So I think, number one, you have to think through what happens when you build a system and if you wanted to get to maturity. The second big thing is trust. We've talked about trust several times already. And I think a lot of people think about trust as a communication problem. I want to articulate and explain why you should trust the system. And that is obviously part of the solution. I think the bigger part of the solution is, how do you design the system? Are you designing it to be transparent? What are the feedback loops? Is there a human in the loop for the essential decisions? Is there accountability? I mean, people are clever. They see when people are saying things but that are not matched by what is going on in the systems. And I think that is really important. Trust is a design problem. And then the third is sort of, does it improve the organization? Through the history of humankind, people have, people paint it as they're against technology. The reality is they're not against technology so much. What they're against is the loss of their ability to make a living. Is it going to replace the human? And I think we have to sort of really, it's incumbent on us as leaders to say, look, this is how we are thinking about the problem. And look, we live in a capitalist system, so I have no doubt in my mind there will be layoffs. But I think the company, to my mind, that has done this extraordinarily well is Walmart. And I'll point to why we should be cautious about our prognostications for the future because, when Amazon bought Whole Foods, the market capitalization of all the grocery companies, including Walmart, because a large share of their sales is groceries, went down by $25 billion in one day. And $25 billion then was a lot of money. It doesn't seem like so much now with these trillion-dollar valuations. But today, Walmart is a trillion-dollar company. It is the biggest employer in the US, probably in the world, 2.1 million employees. The CEO who just retired, Doug McMillon, one of the things he said was, I guarantee everybody the opportunity to make it to the other side of this transformation. We will invest in you. We will train you. We will make sure there's a job waiting for you on the other side if you sort of invest with us, which means you don't have to invest money, but you have to invest your learning. Because this is one of those things that we've never seen in the past. Where the transformation is so profound, we have to make sure that we are also investing in making in our own abilities, our own skills. That to the extent we went to school or college or graduate school, we're now in a world where we have to keep learning new skills, keep adapting to the kinds of jobs that might become available because certain jobs will clearly go away. So this is a transformation like no other. But I think it's reasonable for people to have fears, which raises sort of the burden on the CEO or the C-suite to explain properly what is going on. So I think that is, how to sort of ensure that your employees come along with you on this journey that we all are taking.
I love the way you put these things together. You basically said three things: whether it scales, whether it is trusted, and whether it improves the organization. And I love that the trust factor. Trust is basically engineered, not marketed. Also, the part about agency is huge because people don't resist technology. They resist loss of control. Professor Vijay, we should now talk about the painful reality. Can we talk a little bit more about AI pilots, where most of the organizations have dozens of them and very few of them scale? You kept on saying AI pilots fail. Would like to really understand a little bit more about why do AI pilots fail? And what does that reveal about intent?
That's a great question, Anji. And let me sort of explain it this way. Pilots in some sense don't fail. I mean, most pilots actually, as pilots, succeed. But, when we say fail, what we're really saying is that, they don't scale very well. And I think it is precisely a result of something you spoke about and I spoke about earlier, which is using this metaphor of it is just another technology in my toolkit. When you have that approach to it, then all of these applications look very reasonable. Oh, I can apply technology here, I can apply the AI there. And the fundamental thing to understand about general purpose technologies by the definition is they are general purpose. So they have hundreds, if not thousands of use cases in a large organization. And obviously we don't have the bandwidth to do all of them. So this is where intent comes in. And we spoke about this at the top of the podcast, which is what is your intent for, where you're planning to go and what are the steps along the way? I use the metaphor of the marathon. And I think, so that's point number one. So instead of saying I can apply AI here, I can apply AI there, you need to start with a much more top-down approach, which is where are we going, what decision, what outcome am I trying to improve, and apply AI. So I think when people say pilots don't scale, what they're basically saying is some of them probably don't work technically. It's quite possible. But most of them, I would argue, they cannot get the funding that they need from whoever the CFO's office or whatever the right office is in your organization to scale it. It's not like the proof of concept didn't work. And I think if you don't have the strategic intent right, it's not unreasonable for people to say, I have thousands of applications I could use, and I need to invest with my limited capital budget and what limited OPEX that I have on the systems that are the most valuable to me. And I think part of it is you have to find the balance between bottom-up and top-down approaches, because ultimately, as people say, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And I think this is really important because company after company has told me prioritization is a really huge challenge for us because there's so many opportunities for this. And I think it's really focused on what are the outcomes I'm going for? What are the key decisions? What makes my company different? How do I move in that direction?
Primarily, pilots often ignore economics, the way you mentioned. And it connects to your work on the economics of digital technology. AI doesn't fail because the model wasn't good, or it fails primarily because the system wasn't sustainable and the economics were ignored primarily. What do AI-first enterprises do differently, not just in messaging, but in practice?
It says businesses of the future will succeed if they understand how to harness the benefits of this technology better than their competitors. So I think understanding that AI is a strategic capability that is going to drive every aspect of your business, I think is hugely important. So, it's not one project at a time. It is something that you have to think about building core competence in. I think that is number one. Two, one of the definitions of a general purpose technology is it's not a plug-in technology. You don't just drop it in and say, I'm done, I can apply this. So if I were to give you a hammer, everybody from a child to an adult knows, you want to hang a painting on the wall, you use the hammer, you go pound the nail into the wall. That's the way it works. And you don't need much training. What happens with general purpose technologies is you need sort of a lot of the systems in your organization to change. And then, so that's the, so those are second order effects. You even have third order effects. I'll give you an example that's not from AI. Electricity, as we said earlier, is a general purpose technology. And people don't make the connection between electricity and skyscrapers, right? And my point of view is electricity was invented, distributed, factories changed their layout, but then we built elevators. Some smart people figured out that you can build elevators powered by electricity, and that gave rise to skyscrapers, right? And so you think about sort of how the layout of a city, the layout of countries change with power. Suburbs are a result of electricity, for example. In the same way, when you start thinking about AI, the organization will change and the industry will change. And so you have to think about improving the processes. You have to redesign the processes, reconfigure the processes, taking into account the power of AI. So let me explain that further. One is AI will do some tasks better than humans. Humans will do some tasks better than AI, and humans using AI will do better than AI alone or humans alone. And so this is the way it's going to play out over some period of time. So that's the other thing we have to think about. You're not just plugging in an AI, you're basically saying, what is the reconfiguration of work that must happen? What is the recomposition of my workforce? Because if you aggregate this across the organization, this is very significant transformation. And the third thing, which is part of being a core competence, is they invest in the foundation. And the foundational layer is hugely important. The obvious one we've all talked about is data platforms. But I think that's an essential one, but sort of the more strategically important, I mean, you can't do it without having the data, right? But you need to have the right governance mechanisms. You have to have a talent strategy, both for sort of upskilling your talent, reskilling your talent, also just the talent reconfiguration, thinking through like, what am I going to need? Something can be fully automated. It's an unpleasant thing to say, but you don't necessarily need the job descriptions that you have in your organization. And then the operating models change because there's culture, there's incentives, there's capital allocation, there's speed. All of these things are part of this sort of intangible thing we call the operating model. And I think all of that needs to be synchronized or for it to become sort of the new way in which we live and operate.
That's so powerful, Professor, the way you mentioned, articulated 3 points. So basically you articulated AI first companies should do these 3 things consistently, put in practice. One is they treat AI as a strategic capability. And second is they redesign the processes and decisions. And the third thing, most important thing, is they invest in the right foundation. This is so important and so profound because it shifts the focus from novelty to architecture, from tools to outcomes. That's a great way of putting how enterprises should think AI first into the practice. Now, I want to bring this back to people, the most important aspect of this whole AI evolution. So when AI enters into an organization, it changes how employees feel and how customers experience services and how trust is built or broken. So what do leaders underestimate most about human side of AI first transformation?
I think a lot of people just fundamentally don't understand AI. Like I said before, the two of us having this talk are technology experts. Most people sort of have some rudimentary understanding of it, but they're basing it on what they read or their sort of level of knowledge based on their interactions with AI. And it's reasonable to think about, I don't trust this. You read about bad actors using AI to destroy the world. All these stories are out there. I think it's not unreasonable for people to be worried about these things. So I think trust collapses. And ultimately we need, like I said before, we are building AI to make humankind better. So I think we need to make sure that we don't underestimate the anxiety that employees feel. I use an image in one of my talks, which is sort of interesting. You see somebody who's very excited about AI. That's the image. I'm trying to describe an image in words. And there's another employee who's hiding under his desk because he's so terrified of it. And it's just like, just go away. Leave me, I just need this AI thing to go away. But that is human emotion. And this is where empathy comes in. Rather than say, we know better, which we don't, it's really about understanding that you must meet humans where they are. one of the things I've learned from teaching student service so many years is everyone has a story. They have their own backgrounds, their own educational experiences. And I think we need to meet them where they are. And we need to do this with empathy and kindness because it is more transformative than anything that we've seen before. So I think focusing on managing fear and making sure that people understand that the AI that you're building is aligned not just with profits, but is aligned with sort of the well-being. We call this augmentation of workers. I think that's an important thing to be focused on. And the second piece of it, I think, is clarity. You have to sort of explain what the systems do. If you can't explain why the system made a recommendation that it did or made a prediction that it did, it's very hard to sort of trust a system like that. I think the other important thing is the workflow itself. The workflows that respect the user. And this is where the augmentation argument comes in. We should be it's not going to be possible 100% of the time, but we need to be focused on allowing the user to do a better job than they could do before. And then accountability. There has to be accountability for these systems. We need to make sure that they should, as far as possible, make the right predictions, the right decisions. And if they don't, we need to find a way to rework that, right? And I think making sure we monitor it and making sure that we can modify and correct as we go on, I think is essential because we're not going to get it all right. And I think sort of people who are really trying to lead with AI says, you're not just deploying models because that gives it a technological lens. What we're really trying to do is shape the behavior of the firm, the behavior of the individuals who work at the firm, and sometimes even the behavior of the customers of your firm. So I think all of these are sort of very profound sort of changes that we need to recognize.
I love that line, Professor. You are shaping the behavior. That's very profound and fundamental. What you are summarizing is AI-first leaders must remember that it's not just deploying models, it's shaping the behavior. That's a great way of putting it. Professor, thanks for staying with me to cover the good part of the segment, the bad part of the segment. Now it brings me to the ugly part of the segment. So we know AI embeds so many assumptions. And here is the truth. It's a very hard truth. How you build becomes what you build. I would like to hear your opinion, Professor. Why is that so?
I think it's because the how determines a lot of other things as well. It determines the trust, it determines the organizational health, it determines the scale at which you can kind of deploy the system. And if you get the how wrong, you create this fear. You make the systems more opaque. If you don't want to destroy human agency. And I think when you put all of these things together, the how becomes very, very important. So we use the phrase responsible AI a lot, and that's a nice headline phrase. But when you start getting into the responsible AI, and I think, Anji, you asked a really powerful question because, at the end, you might have a fabulous design for the system that is very responsible indeed. But if you don't take people along with you and they are not able to see the how and they can trust, because nobody ultimately knows what went into the system. Right? It's very hard to take apart a model with billions and trillions of parameters and say, what the heck is it actually doing? But if you sort of behave with ethically and sort of are transparent and they can see step by step how the structure was created, then they are far more likely to trust the system. And that's ultimately what gets you to success. And I'm going to use, since we're talking about ugly, I'm going to bring in a slightly ugly metaphor. We've often seen this in third world countries, unfortunately. I'm thinking, where these beautiful looking buildings and there's a slight earthquake or something goes wrong and the entire building collapses, right? Because when you look at the outside of the building, it may look modern and may look very pretty. It's well painted, got good design. But if the foundation's not solid, it collapses when there's a small earthquake, right? And I think that's what we need to focus on. If people could see what went into the building as it was being built, they would trust it more. And I think the same thing applies to AI, which is if we can see that everything is being made being done with transparency and people are being brought along, you will get people to trust the system. And it's not an easy task, but it has to be done.
The way you explain that building is fantastic. I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, trust isn't marketed to the outside world. Trust is really engineered. It has to come from the engineering of it. And AI-first enterprises don't just add models. They really redesign around better decisions and really invest in the foundations that make trust is possible. That's why the trust has to be really engineered, and it isn't marketed really. So thanks for staying with me on this wonderful conversation, going through the good part of the segment, the bad part of the segment, and the ugly part of the segment for the episode Why Intent Matters in AI First World. Here's what I'm taking away from this conversation. AI First is really not a tool strategy. It's really a decision strategy. And intent really matters because AI scales outcomes not just efficiencies. And decision frameworks really prevent chaos. And how you build really shapes trust, adoption, and impact as much as tech itself. To our listeners, thank you for joining us to the episode 1 of Enterprise Decoded, why intent matters in AI first world. In our next episode, we will talk about something just as critical, designing AI systems that people actually trust, and why trust should be treated as a technical requirement, not a PR problem. Until then, I'm Anjimaram. This is Enterprise Decoded. See you in the next equally power packed segment. And as my favorite sign off goes, let's get to work.